So I am so excited to welcome to Temple Sholom Rabbi Larry Hoffman. He's originally, if you didn't know, from Kitchener, Ontario. Any other Ontario people here? Lots. A few at least. Okay. There you go. Rabbi Hoffman is a world-renowned scholar on liturgy, author of over 40 books, including getting a National Book Award, and a beloved teacher. He taught at my alma mater, Hebrew Union College, also where Rabbi Dan and Rabbi Brown went, various campuses. So he taught there from 1973 to 2019, according to your bio. And he also served as the director of the School of Sacred Music, where the cantors are trained, from 1984 to 1987. Rabbi Hoffman served for several years as a visiting professor at the University of Notre Dame. He's lectured at such places as the Jewish Theological Seminary, the University of Southern California, and the Yale Divinity School. He's a past president of the North American Academy of Liturgy, the professional and academic organization for liturgists, and in January 2004, received that organization's annual Bracha Award for outstanding lifetime contributions to the field. In 1994, he co-founded Synagogue 2000, a trans-denominational project to envision the ideal synagogue as a moral and spiritual center for the 21st century. As Synagogue 3000 now, it has launched Next Door, a national initiative to engage the next generation through a relational approach, featuring strong communities with transformed synagogues at their center. Personally, several of you were asking how I know Rabbi Hoffman. I know him through the Tisch and Star Fellowship at HUC. This is a 3-year learning fellowship for rabbinic and cantorial students that encourages innovative ideas and out-of-the-box thinking to approach synagogue life for clergy in training, and it was a wonderful opportunity that I had during school and that I continue to have as an alumni of the program. And with that, I will say I'm just so excited to have Rabbi Hoffman here, so please give him a warm welcome.
Can you hear me now? Ah, yes, that's much better. Okay, even I can hear me. Yes, it does. I'm so happy to be here, I can't tell you. First of all, I want to talk about your cantor. She says that she just happens to be a member of this fellowship that I have been running for 15 years. But what she didn't tell you is, of her entire class, she was the only person who was chosen to be in the fellowship. This is a highly competitive thing. We only have enough fellowship money for one cantor in the program. And so she was it. You are so fortunate having her, let me tell you. Yes, give her some applause. She is obviously a first-rate singer. I mean, her voice is magnificent. But more than that, she really cares about Judaism and knows it. And more than that, she loves people. I mean, you know her better than I do, but by now, in terms of congregational work. But she's the real thing. You're very fortunate to have her. We create a lot of rabbis in the Hebrew Union College, not a lot of cantors. It's very hard to get a good cantor. When you've got one, let me tell you, you're blessed, and you're doubly blessed, because I know Shani, and you're very fortunate to have her. And I want to thank you for greeting me so warmly and for just being you. Now, I had forgotten something for years, and it just came to me while I'm sitting at this table. So I'm going to tell you the story. In 1964, I entered the Hebrew Union College, become a rabbi at the New York campus. I was there for 5 years, was ordained, and I had the feeling that I didn't know enough. And so there was this fellowship that they offered through the Cincinnati School, which had a graduate program. And I signed up for it just because I was embarrassed not to know enough. So I went for 3 or 4 years there. And in 1973, I finally was graduated with a Ph.D. The college immediately offered me a position back in New York to teach. So I just went back to where I had been as a rabbinic student and turned around to the other side of the desk, so to speak. But I'd always thought of myself as a congregational rabbi, and I always wanted to return to Canada. A couple years after that, I don't remember exactly when, I'm in New York, and I'm doing whatever I'm doing teaching. And I thought to myself, you know, it's not too late. You really could still be a congregational rabbi if you really wanted to. And guess what congregation was advertising for a rabbi that year? Yours. And I read whatever blurb you sent, and I said to my wife at the time, you know, maybe we should give this up. Maybe I should apply for this young congregation. The idea of being in Vancouver sounded great, you know, and a young, new congregation of Jews. I said, this is a great idea. I think I should apply. Well, we had 2 children at the time. We had just bought a house. I was doing well as a professor, and she said, you sure you want to move? I mean, don't you like what we're doing? Well, yeah, I said, but, you know, I don't know. Anyway, I thought of it for a month, and the rest is history. But here I am, see? History moves in strange ways. I'm really happy to be with you. I'm going to talk about our prayer book today. I do this a lot because the most amazing thing is you might think that in past years, Jews knew much more than they do now. Our assumption is that every Jew in Europe knew everything about Judaism. The minute we came to Canada, that was all gone. We're the first generation of people who are not really Jewishly learned. And that's just not true. For most of Jewish history, most Jews did not know a great deal about the Talmud. You think they could even afford to buy one, let alone read it? What they knew, however, was one book. And that was the prayer book that you take for granted. That was the one book they used because they actually prayed from it. So I want you to think of the prayer book as like an hourglass. Judaism gets poured in the top, and it comes out in distilled form into the prayer book. That has been for centuries. That has been the way Jews understood, were introduced to, and really knew what Judaism was. And there's a fascinating history to it. So, I'll start with a story. I was in Indiana someplace or other giving a lecture, I know not when, but a long time ago. And there was looked like an elderly man. Now he's younger than I am, but okay. He was elderly to me at the time. And he kind of hung around as I gave 3 lectures on the prayer book. And in the last one, he waited until everyone had gone. And in a shy sort of way, he walked up to where I still stood with the local rabbi. We were talking. And he said to me, I looked at him, he said to me, I see you like prayer books. I said, that is an understatement. Yes. He said, then let me tell you my story. Because me, by myself, I'm a prayer book. I wondered what he meant. And he said to me, I went through Hitler's camps. I was young at the time, strong, he said. I could work. And so I survived. But I began, this is a true story, he said, I began watching as other people came and died, came and went, disappeared. New people came, they went, new people came. And when I decided, what would happen if, God forbid, I was the last Jew in the world? And I decided that it was on me then to make sure that Judaism would survive. So I thought to myself, I know a lot about the Siddur. I will learn the rest of it by heart. And just in case I'm the last Jew, I will know all of our prayers by heart. And I will pass them along, and Judaism will survive. So when people would come into the camp, he said, I'd say to them things like, remember the prayers, Yalav Yavov, what comes after that? And somebody would know. And then all day long as I worked, I would go over that prayer again and again and again with a new part that I learned. And I did this so much, he said, by now I know most of the prayers, so look, I'm really a prayer book. Thank God I'm not the last Jew in the world. Well, thank God indeed. But he didn't have the wrong idea. The Siddur is a Jewish diary through the centuries. I want to show you why that's so. The problem is, see, it gets delivered to you, this Siddur. You come on Shabbos morning and they give you the book and, you read a little bit from it, but you don't really appreciate what went into it and how it grew and what it was. So let me talk about how we began praying back in the rabbinic period, roughly the first century, second century of our era, 2,000 years ago, something like that, and how it became a prayer book, and how to think about prayer differently, maybe, than what you're used to thinking about, okay? So first of all, how did we start praying in the first place? Once upon a time, there was a temple. Remember, you knew that, right? In the Bible times, there was a temple. Jews didn't go to the temple. They were busy being farmers somewhere or another. The priests ran the temple, and they did sacrifices. And once in a while, you showed up and did something. Maybe on Pesach, you walked with your lamb, and you came and killed a lamb or something, and you had a Seder under the leafy green tree outside the temple, something like that. Most people, though, didn't. So for most people, prayer was a very individual thing. There was no minyan, no synagogues, nothing like that. Instead, prayer was sort of like when you wanted to, you shouted out to God, and God answered you or didn't. Or you thought God answered you or didn't. But what you did was you just prayed to God when you wanted to. You'd say, God, help me, or something like that. We still do that sort of thing today. There was nothing organized yet. Around the first century, a new group of leaders came into being. We called them the rabbis. And they're the ones who invented this thing called prayer. They had the idea that not everybody can go to the temple. And then when the temple was destroyed, then we really needed something. And so they decided that we would have this thing called prayer. But think about it, will you please? This was an oral society. People didn't read and write. Maybe some people could read, and some people could write. But what would they read and write with? I mean, you couldn't go and buy a notepad, and not everybody had pens. Do you know how they learned to read back then? If you learned to read, the way they learned to read in the Roman Empire was they had a slate, and on the slate was wax. And kids would go to school, and they'd learn how to write something, but they could only write what the slate would hold. And then they'd go home, and they'd melt it down, and the next day they'd start all over again. How much can they learn to read and write that way? Not very much. So it's an oral society. Now, what that meant was, among other things, how would anyone get together to decide what a prayer book should be? And even if they decided, how could they print it? They couldn't. And if they had a scribe write it, how many people could buy a copy? There were no copies. So prayer was something that was simply done orally. That's why you have a repetition of the Shemona Esrei. Originally, nobody had a book. They didn't know the Shemona Esrei. So you had a quiet time when those who wanted to could say whatever prayers they wanted to God. And then one person would say whatever they did, maybe all of a Shemona Esrei, maybe only 5 blessings, who knows? Some leader would do something out loud, and everybody else would say, Amen, Amen, Amen. That was it. That was the prayer service. How many people here have gone through leadership in this synagogue? Yeah? How many people have been on committees anywhere? Do you like committee meetings? How many people like committee meetings? How many people sometimes don't like committee meetings? Aha, the nays have it. Well, do you know what? There were no committee meetings in the first century. You know why? How could they even send out the invitations? By the time I meet with you and you tell me you're busy next Tuesday, but Wednesday's okay, and now I go across town walking. By the end of the day, I say to you, can you make it next Wednesday? You say, no, Tuesday. I mean, can you imagine how hard it would be? And by the way, what good would the committee meetings have been? Nobody could take minutes. Who could remember? Now, suppose I'm a prayer leader, okay? In these early kind of prayer experiences. You don't have prayer books. You know some things by heart. We all can memorize the Shema. How hard is that? But other than that, you don't memorize very much. So it comes time to pray privately, and you do whatever you do. And now I do with the Shemona Esrei. Now let's suppose I don't have a book. How do I know what the right words are? The answer is there are no right words yet. I make them up. And let's say I make it up beautifully because I happen to be very poetic that day. And I want to say, I want to pray for health because there's a bracha for health, right? So I say a bracha over health. I'm not reading it. I'm not memorizing it. I made it up. And I kind of like it. I think I'll do that next week, too. Only by next week, I've forgotten because I didn't write it down. Imagine if I was teaching you a class in that situation. And I say something brilliant today. Boy, I'm really on. But you can't write it down. So you come up to me and you say, tell me again that was a great turn of a phrase. I say, what phrase? I don't remember. So you go to 10 other people and say, don't you remember what he said? And you know what it is. You'd say, yeah, it was sort of like, I think it was. No, it wasn't. I think it was. You have an argument. Who remembers? So prayer was something that was ad-lib. You know what it was like? It was jazz, just like jazz. People knew what the melody of the prayer book was. That is, they knew you start with some singing of psalms, and that they memorized because psalms are in the Bible. And then after that, they would say the Shema and a couple of things around that. And then they would do the Amidah. And if it was Monday or Thursday or Shabbat, they'd read the Torah. That they had. And then they'd do a couple things afterward. That was it. If you go to shul regularly, do you know, you realize that the Kaddish, for example, occurs many times? There's a mourner's Kaddish at the end. But also there's a half Kaddish. Every once in a while you're saying part of a Kaddish. Why is that? Because there were so many different versions of it once upon a time. And they finally put a whole bunch of them in the prayer book. Some were small, some were big, some were about mourner's Kaddish. Originally, those were alternatives that somehow made it through the ages. People went to services more often probably back then. Why do you think that is? You think they were more pious? No. The reason they went more often was there was no competition. What else are you going to do? I mean, there were no movies. Nobody had TV. You couldn't even go online. Nobody streamed anything. So came time for Shabbos, you'd say, hey, let's go to services. I hear there's a really great prayer leader in the shul around the corner. Let's take it in. Now, there was the only competition, really, was other religions. Because somebody could say to you, no, you know, there's a Dionysus cult around the corner. They drink wine up the wazoo. Let's go there. I mean, there are alternatives. But if you're Jewish, then you went to a synagogue and you did whatever they did there. And some people got reputations of being really good prayer leaders. They were like jazz artists. The melody was like going from one topic to another. That they did everywhere. But how they did the topic, what they sang, what they read. And by the way, it wasn't the rabbi who did this. It was the chazan. So the chazan was the most important communal leader back then. The rabbi knew the halacha and so on, but there was the chazan who knew how to do the prayer leading. And that's how the whole thing got started. It took a long time for this to spread. It's not as if they built synagogues for the first time, let's say in the first century, and the next thing you know, there's a building boom all over the Middle East. That didn't happen. There was a little steeple here, somebody built something there, someone else built nothing, but they met under a tree, it was fun, it was fine. Used to be, we thought, that all this happened within 100 years, certainly 2. We now think actually it took more like 400 years for that to happen, for it slowly to spread. And as it spread, more and more people got good at this jazz kind of thing. And in addition, slowly but surely, some versions became commonplace. Let's suppose I'm a really good jazz prayer leader, okay? And I say to you, you know, I'm going to teach this table how to do it. And you come and you study with me, and you get pretty good at it, all right? Now, how many do we have here? 3, 6. So now we have 6 more prayer leaders. So now you decide you'll teach that table. And they're going to teach 2 more tables. Then all of a sudden we all know, now we're going to go out and teach another 50 people. Can you see how slowly but surely the art of jazz prayer leading would die? It would be easier just to memorize something. You're very smart at this table. I know you'd have no trouble. But let's suppose, what's your name?
Wendy.
Wendy. Let's suppose Wendy's good at it. Wendy finds 10 of her friends. What are the chances all 10 of them are going to be good at it? Someone's going to say, Wendy, just tell me what you say. I'll memorize it, okay? And so slowly but surely, the art was lost, and it got memorized. And eventually, certain versions of prayer were standard commonplace, and the art of creativity was gone. There was still no prayer book, mind you. Somewhere, we don't know where, maybe the 7th century, 8th century, people started writing down things in manuscripts. So if Wendy was wealthy, she might now read prayer with a manuscript, a big thing in front of her. Though, come to think of it, she wouldn't have done that because only men did it back then. But you get the idea, right? The first prayer book doesn't come into being until the 9th century. That's a long time later. And it's about this thick in printed fashion now. And it had all of your daily prayers, all your Shabbos prayers, all the Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur prayers, and the Haggadah. And you say to yourself, wait a minute. Now it takes this many pages. What happened? Well, people added things in the Middle Ages. Every once in a while, somebody added a prayer. Then somebody said, I'll do it differently. And the next thing you know, there were poets who wrote things. Then poetry had to get added. And one of the things about Jews is we never throw anything out. So nobody ever said, well, we'll put that prayer in, but let's take something out. Oh, no, we'll put them both in. And that's why, especially if you're used to an Orthodox, how many people grew up Orthodox? No, Orthodox shul, went to an Orthodox. Remember the size of the Siddur? How long are services in the Orthodox shul you went to? More than an hour? Yes. Because the Siddur was so long. And you had to run through it quickly to get it done. I mean, you couldn't just stop on a page and think about it. When I was a kid, I learned how to read Hebrew by my Orthodox rabbi in Kitchener, where I was born. And he taught me how to read fast, because I had to read fast to get through the prayers. How about Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur? How big is the Maser for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur? Big, right? How long does it take to do Rosh Hashanah morning services? Oh, like half a day, right? Because no one threw anything out. The next major change was when printing developed in the 16th century. Printers now took anything they could find and they put it into a book. In order to sell the book, any prayer they had, they'd throw in the book so they could say, look what we've got here. And the result was we ended up now having everything on print. And now it occurred to the Jews of the world, this must have been given to Moses on Mount Sinai. We can't change anything. It was left to Reform Judaism to say, actually, we can change things. Because Reform Jews went to university in the 19th century, in Germany particularly, where Reform Judaism got started. They went to university and they studied Jewish history. And what I'm telling you, they learned. And they said, wait a minute. There used to be all this creative stuff. What happened to creativity? And music was really important back then. Now what are we doing? And so they decided they would cut the prayer book, only put the prayers in that they wanted. They would translate it into the vernacular so you'd know what it meant. And out came modern Reform Judaism. And over time, we have continued to be the movement that more than any other movement is willing to change our Siddur, our service, to meet the times. And that is because you should think of the prayer book not as just a book. You should think of it more like that man who I told you about at the beginning. You should think of this as the story of the Jewish people through time. The prayer book is the Jewish diary of the centuries. Every generation wrote new prayers and added it in. If you know the history of the prayers, I could open up every page. I'm going to do a prayer with you later on, one at the end, right? Remind me when last 15 minutes, you're going to do that, right? Because I'll forget. I'll get lost, and where am I? So every prayer in there reflects a certain era. And if you know the history of them all, it's like reading through the diary of the Jewish people. Now, diaries are written in chronological order, and the prayer book isn't. So it doesn't look like a diary. Instead, it's slotted in. Everything's slotted in according to the way the flow of the service goes, what I called the melody before. So some things are added at the beginning, not because they were written so long ago, but it fit there better. The theme fit that theme. Or people tended to write poetry for especially the Amidah. The Amidah has expanded. It's about this big, let's say, on Shabbos. It's like this on the high holidays. Because medieval Jews wrote special poetry that went with the themes of the prayers in the Amidah. And they got inserted. How long ago do you still remember Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur? I mean, it's not that long ago, right? Do you remember Unatana Tokef? Does that ring a bell with you? Unatana Tokef, that's where it says on Rosh Hashanah we are written, on Yom Kippur we are sealed, our fate is sealed. This is a difficult prayer to read or to believe, certainly, but it was a poem someone wrote. He didn't mean it literally, and he wrote it for the Amidah, for the high holidays, for obvious reasons. So it got slotted in. But then there are a whole bunch of other ones, too. So the thing grew, as I say, as people wrote new things. And nowadays, for our purposes of prayer, we cut out what we can. But for purposes of the Jewish diary, all those prayers tell a story of Jews in the Golden Age in Spain, after the Crusades, when Jews had been massacred by the Crusaders who passed through Germany and really decimated the Jewish community. The same thing in Poland, in the golden age of Poland, when we had yeshivas everywhere, and the not such golden age in Poland, when in 1648, Khmelnytsky, the Cossack, again destroyed so many Jews. I mean, it's all there. This is your story, but more. It's not a story you actually sit down and read. The prayer book just looks like a book because it's got 2 covers. But it's not really a book, and the reason you know that is when you go on vacation, you don't go into the bookstore or go online and say, I think I'll read a good prayer book on the beach. Think of the prayer book as a script for the sacred drama that we call prayer. It's the Jewish script that Jews for 2,000 years have been writing and rewriting, and we are still rewriting it today. Think of all the additions and changes as rewrites, as Jews say, this doesn't reflect my life. I want to add something to it. It should reflect who I am. To go to services, whatever it may mean to talk to God, and I'll leave you to figure that out, that's another story. But as much as we talk to God, we talk to each other, and we talk to ourselves. You're standing in there and you're singing Shema Yisrael. Probably you don't do that when you're alone at home. There's something about being with everyone else. And when we sing Shema Yisrael or Avinu Malkeinu, these songs that we know, you look around the room and everybody's singing it. And you say to yourself, maybe not out loud, but you realize Jews are doing this all over the world. To go through this script is to say, we are enacting our diary, recalling our history, and thinking about our future, and connecting with Jews everywhere. It is therefore the script of the Jewish soul. Now, I'm not necessarily in love with every prayer, nor do I love services all the time. I confess, I too get bored sometimes, even though I know the history of the thing. And partly that's because I don't use the right strategy. So I'm going to give you a strategy for how you can approach the service. When you buy a book, like a novel, right? And you read your way through the novel. Or when you go to a play, Shakespeare, let's say, and you sit there in the Shakespearean play and you don't understand all the words. Come on. I mean, I studied Shakespeare a lot. I'm Canadian. We all studied Shakespeare. But you think I can just pick up a Shakespearean play and understand it all right away? No. A lot of it I don't quite get every word. I get the idea of the thing, right? Whether it's a novel or a play, the only way to get something out of it is what's called in English literature to suspend your disbelief. Stick with the play at first. Suspend your disbelief. So stick with, let's go Hamlet. Let's use Hamlet. Oh, you go to see Hamlet. Now you know how it ends. If someone says there's a new performance of Hamlet in Vancouver, you don't say, I saw it once. You know, you say, oh, that's interesting. And you don't go to it and think, maybe it ends differently. No, you know what's going to happen. And so very early on, you're watching it, and a ghost appears. Nobody says, come on, honey, let's leave. There are no ghosts. That's crazy. For purposes of the play, there are ghosts. That's suspending your disbelief. You normally, if someone says, oh, there's a ghost in the room, you might call a psychologist, right? But when you know it's part of the Hamlet story, you just go with it. You accept it. Let's see where it goes. We'll pretend there's a ghost. I'll listen to the ghost talk. I'll see what Hamlet thinks about the ghost. And everything follows. But the same is true, see, of a novel. I mean, you enter into the novel, and it's a time and a place that you know nothing about. For purposes of that novel, you're back there and then. Sometimes things happen and they're really strange. You say, I don't think that would happen in real life. But you don't close the book and give up on it. You say, let's go with the flow. See where it takes us. Well, the prayer book is like that. Jewish prayer has all kinds of things in there that in your normal life you might not accept. But you say, well, for purposes of the plot, let's see where it goes. I'll live with it. I'll pretend for that moment that this is really happening. That's the only way I can get through the prayer that I just referred to you, called Unatana Tokef. Do I really think that on Rosh Hashanah it is written and on Yom Kippur it is sealed what's going to happen to me next year, that I'll die by fire or water? Of course I don't believe that. But I accept it like Hamlet's ghost. Let's see what happens. Let's just play with it. Now the Chazan is singing it. So now, all the more so, I don't have to live with it as something literal. What percentage of songs do you believe literally? Almost none. All those songs about love, it doesn't work out that way usually in life. But you sing the song about love anyway, because that's what love should be, and you play the game, and it's part of your aspiration. Prayer should be inspiring and aspiring. It's aspirational. When you read that God hears prayer, I've had my share of difficulties. I mean, I remember when I used to address Shishim people, and they looked like my parents. Hey, I are one. I mean, I know what it's like to go through life and to lose someone I love. I know what it's like to know that I prayed for people that they didn't get better. I mean, I'm like you. I'm no fool. So why do I read those prayers then? Do I think suddenly God's going to answer all my prayers? When I read, blessed are you, O God, who hears prayer. I don't know. Sometimes maybe, sometimes not. But at that moment, if I suspend my disbelief, for that moment, I'm in a world where, yeah, it's just possible that this time it'll work. Yeah, I really want to believe that there's something in the universe that responds to me. See how I interpret it now. Yes, I don't know anything about God, really. How do I know? God is so different than any of us, right? None of us knows for sure